Well, good morning, everyone. I wanted to pick up with the big systems that we're watching coming into the west this week by just showing you some water vapor imagery from this Tuesday morning. And the deep low that, of course, hit California pretty hard yesterday, producing numerous reports of strong winds, a lot of flooding rainfall, and also some pretty serious snowfall that added up in parts of the Sierra Nevada mountains. This low pressure system this morning is trying to spin its way up toward this part of Washington. Now, still kind of waiting in the wings, we have another system behind it, an even deeper low that's forming over parts of the Aleutian Islands. That's going to be important, a key factor to the pattern change we're expecting at the very end of this month. So just keeping this all kind of in the context of what's happened recently, this is your last 72 hours of total accumulated precipitation. And again, for the last 3 days, we've hit Northern California pretty hard with some soaking rain, some places picking up greater than 6 inches of liquid in the mountains, adding in some places up to 3 feet of new snow. There's also quite heavy rain down here in this part of Southern California as well. Outside of that, much of the rest of the country has been in weaker flow, has been away from low pressure development, and as a result, pretty dry for the last 3 days. But I don't want to ignore what came over Florida. This was pretty well predicted last Friday as to the evolution of the upper level flow that was going to take this moisture through parts of Texas originally and then push it over to Florida. The skies did clear out yesterday. I was in Destin, saw them clear out. It was kind of nice, although it was pretty chilly down there early in the morning. But there were actually 4 landspouts reported yesterday. Was it yesterday or the day before? I'll have to go back and look. But earlier this week, down here in parts of like around Key West, down here in the Florida Keys. All right, with all of that as kind of a backdrop, can I show you the sun is rising early this morning here on the East Coast, but I want to take you back again to yesterday. And I'm just watching again as this large system comes into the west. I was watching the central U.S. where I could see through the clouds and, through the clear skies all the way down to where there's snow on the ground and watching that snow continue to melt under very mild conditions that have returned. And why I'm just watching this so carefully is, again, this was that region that got painted with some snow over the weekend. And as that snow is melting, my hope is that it's going to work against this upper level soil moisture deficit throughout parts of the Ohio, Mississippi, and part of the Missouri Valley. So if you just notice, going down to 40 centimeters or 16 inches, this is an area that since the beginning of February has been kind of left out of the flow. Now remember, we've had good moisture return in January, and a lot of that did work down. So below this, we've eaten away at the soil moisture issues. But these modeled soil moisture percentile maps just show that part of the Ohio Valley lately has had some topsoil that's really started to dry out again. And it makes sense when you look at it. Since the beginning of February, this has been an area that's been pretty dry. So just stretching here from Iowa, Missouri, Illinois, straight through this part of the Eastern Great Lakes up into, all the way to Maine here, been pretty dry. I'm also just continuing to watch this part of the Carolinas as well, given that we have seen several systems miss coastal North Carolina, and it's starting to show up here on the map. Okay, outside of that, the other piece I want to talk to you about with this is where we're expecting the temperatures to go. And just to show you the last 5 days or so and how they rank, this kind of gives you an idea of the extent of that colder air that came in post-Valentine's Day. Now remember earlier we had some stronger signals that it was going to be a longer duration cold event, but we really limited it to about 3 days. And so that's where the rank sat. And what's important about that is at least cold enough to build up some more ice in the Great Lakes, although this isn't going to last long. We did bump that number up to 5.77% as of yesterday. And so there you go. That's what the cold air did. But overall, this winter, if you look at it from December 1 through the 19th of February, the Great Lakes states and surrounding upper Midwest and all the way into New England is still having its near record, or possibly in some locations, record warmest winter on record. And as you're about to see, the pattern is going to be very conducive to finishing this month of February, which would round out winter with very mild conditions. Our surface winds today are kind of pointing at that. We've already returned southerly winds here pretty clearly. And so interestingly enough, yesterday when we were watching the wildfires on Sunday, not wildfires, but the prescribed burns down in the south when the flow was going from north to south, that's all flipped around now. And this is a lot of warm air advection, returning quite a bit of warmth here. We're also getting downslope wind off the mountains, which is going to be critical for compressional warming and giving us much above average temperatures. They're going to look like this by the time we get to later on this afternoon. 60s, almost cracking 70 in parts of Nebraska, 50s and 60s in Iowa. Very mild air here as the coolest air exits east and we start to see cooler conditions in the west simply due to cloud cover and precipitation. But with all this warmth, I just want to let you know, this is your next 5 days, and it continues to be 15 to 20 degrees warmer than average in the middle part of the country. And as a result of all of this, we're actually going to pick up some GDDs. So this is using a base of 50 and a max of 86. But if you were to plant corn in southern Texas, it will emerge in the next 7 days based on 120 GDD threshold there. So there's quite a bit of mild air coming in, and it's going to last day 5 through 10. And we just see this return of cold air into Western North America, critical to the longer range pattern I'll show you in a few moments. And even out there, day 10 through 15, which gets us, of course, fully into March, the first 5 days of March, we're not yet seeing a breakdown going back over to any sort of cold air risk. We're going to talk about that more in just a few moments here. So I want to show you something that I think is just important to understand about this year's pattern and why I've been so excited about changes in the Pacific. This is what the average jet stream wind speed and location has looked like since the beginning of the new year. We have seen at times far to the south, but extended subtropical pieces of the jet. And up here, you notice this is wind speed, average speed below 20 meters per second. I mean, this is extremely slow winds in this part of North America. Now, I show you this because I'd like to compare it to a year ago where we had substantial snow cover all throughout the northern tier of the U.S. and throughout the Canadian prairie. And this is what the winds look like then. So if I go back and forth, can you see the net position shift first? More south this year, more north last year. And then you can see the significant difference here of where the stronger branch of the polar jet lived a year ago. And that was what really just changed everything up this year. We've had such good subtropical flow, but with subtropical flow, you get mild conditions and you get very limited chances of bringing storm systems across the northern tier of North America. So now that puts into context this story we've been carrying for about a week now, and that is to show you that when we get out there toward Wednesday, we have another coastal low here. This is the one that I told you was coming out of the Aleutian Islands toward California, but the real show here is this. And again, just to draw it for you, that is a branch of the polar jet that's finally going to enter North America via British Columbia into the Pacific Northwest by early next week. It's right there. And what I'm liking about this pattern is the size of the ridge coming up from Hawaii. Because if we can just push this up, it'll force this to dip down. And as that occurs, just looking at the normal wavelength here of the atmosphere, beginning around the 26th, 27th, 28th of the month, we're going to watch repeated shortwave troughs just spin around this broader trough that's going to occupy most of the western half of North America. And it's going to set us up with a very volatile end of February and beginning of March. And so here we go into the beginning of March yet again, and the models are continuing to show some sort of flow like this. We talked a lot about this yesterday, but that particular setup is one that's going to drive a lot of systems to dive into the west, eject out of the Rockies, tap into Gulf moisture, and likely get us on a path where we're seeing, a system every 5 to 7 days rolling off of the western part of the United States. This also delivers a lot of cold air into the Pacific Northwest, putting in some late season snow, which is needed. And this is also a pattern that, for the most part, opens up the United States to some wet conditions. So that is, we've now been having this in the discussion for about 7 or 8 days. So I'm showing you this just to show you consistency, which is what I really enjoy seeing in the weather forecast models. So what I want to do next is I made the statement of a system every 5 to 7 days. And we're going to look at a map where the color coding represents pressure. So higher pressure would be in these colors, lower pressure would be when you start to see these colors right in through here. And what's also labeled on this are the locations of the European ensemble's forecast of low pressure. So we're going to watch, today and tomorrow, it's going to be mostly in the west where the lower pressure resides. We're going to get one wave to come out here, coming out of Colorado into Oklahoma this Wednesday night and Thursday, and that low is going to open up through parts of the Missouri Valley, getting into Illinois, Indiana, right along the Ohio River and move east. So can you see that low sneaking through there? Pretty good model agreement on that. So that's going to open this area up to some moisture. Again, we need that moisture. As you just saw, most of February was drier throughout this part of the Ohio Valley. Now, what I'm interested in is following this. This is the 23rd, getting into the 24th, 25th. Watch. You start to see low pressure developing here. We've not seen that for most of this winter. And then following it, the 25th, 26th, 27th, did you see that? There's a low actually sliding down through British Columbia into Alberta and eventually into Montana, northern Montana, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, North Dakota. And remember, the flow around this is going to be doing something like that. So after entering through British Columbia in the northwest, it ends up here in the midsection of the country. Now you can see there's a pretty large spread on where this low is going to be. But the idea here is that if you have a high pressure cell sitting down off of the southeast coast, we're going to open this up to Gulf moisture. And we're going to see at the end of this month, I don't know if it's the 26th or the 27th, maybe even starting on the 25th, but that time frame, we are going to begin to get into the atmosphere wanting to produce big spring type storm systems. And there goes the first one. Let's just play it out according to the model timing. So this is the night of the 25th through the 26th, 27th, toward the 28th. And then watch again. Here comes the next round. You can see already as we get out there into the beginning of March, where's low pressure forming? In the lee of the Rockies. You only get low pressure forming here if the jet is doing something like that. So this is going to get us to that time period where we get systems rolling through with a bit more regularity, forming in the lee of the Rockies, using the cyclogenesis that happens there to just take systems off, and they're going to follow that kind of checkmark view that we've been talking about. Okay, so how do we get there? Well, today, the risk is still west. While we do have quite cold air that's in Georgia and Florida, we do have the winter storm warnings out for the Sierra Nevada, flood watches out for a broad section of California, and some flood warnings tucked away in here as well, plus still some strong winds. As we take a look on the high-res models as to how that low that's moving up toward Washington is going to move today, this starts off at 6 o'clock this morning, and we play through middle of the day, getting into this evening. You can see the low curling up here. Widely scattered, heavy rains still possible, and brief but intense snow getting through parts of Nevada, Utah, up toward parts of Wyoming. So this is Wednesday morning, Wednesday midday, getting into Wednesday afternoon and evening. Now at that point, that low, the one that curled up here, is a part of a broader trough that sends out a low into the plains. So this is Wednesday night, getting into early Thursday. And you're going to see that low tightening up right here. And it's going to be open to some Gulf moisture. And we're going to watch for some precip in this region as we work our way from Wednesday night into Thursday morning. And then that low by the high-res NAM by Thursday midday will be sitting somewhere over the Ohio Valley. But that's as far as the NAM goes. We need to switch over and show you the European and the GFS. Now I want to give you this one more time, but show you a single model run. So what you're watching here by Wednesday, Thursday, why is that low not very deep? Well, the wave isn't very amplified, but there's still going to be some jet stream divergence on the northern side of this Wednesday, Thursday, right here to develop a low. Okay, that system moves east, and then here we go. Here is the subtropical component of the jet. Here is the polar component of the jet. This is Friday, getting into Saturday and Sunday. Now, this is it. That is the piece we're watching that's going to start on the 25th, putting a system into British Columbia. Here's to the south, the trough that's going to be just off the coast of California. Now these two things come together. Monday, that's the 26th, Tuesday, the 27th, and look at that. That is what I like. See that southwest flow? Look at that turn. So this is why we're expecting to get more activity coming off the Rocky Mountains. And I think a lot of us are thinking about Tuesday night into Wednesday, because the polar jet's coming in and getting support from a jet streak coming over Texas at that point. So what I need you to remember is some point midweek next week, we're going to have to watch out for the risk of severe weather in this area as this combination between the polar and subtropical jet begins to produce a system that rolls in the midsection of the country. I think this one could be potent. I don't have any details yet. I just need you to know that we will continue this narrative on this midweek next week system as a potential big one for this part of the country. And look what's behind it. More polar jet, subtropical help. I still think it's going to be active beyond that. So now we can compare the models, GFS to the European, and you're going to see the system rolling through the west. It'll emerge into parts of Oklahoma, out into Missouri, see this? And then spread across the Ohio Valley there, and then get into New England. Could be some snow in the interior as the models are suggesting here. We'll take a look at how much in a moment. Then we're waiting, right? We're waiting on two things. There is the subtropical, there is the polar, and this is Sunday. So going from Sunday into Monday into Tuesday, I'm just going to play it quickly so you can see that flow come together. That's next week. Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. See it? So we'll watch out for something next week to come out of this pattern. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, there will be some sort of a low that comes out, and I just think it's going to have the potential for snow north, severe weather south, and some heavy rains in between. High-res European model, if we add it all up just to the next 7 days, again, love that Ohio River Valley precip that comes in there, but taking this out 7 full days in the model, there we go. We got an idea on the West Coast precip. We know we're going to be drier in the interior. We have one system coming out. We're waiting. This is up to Monday, so we're still waiting on the pattern to come together after that. The GFS looks very similar. So there is the European. Here's the GFS. The biggest difference that I'm kind of taking note of here is kind of the westward extent of this. The GFS doesn't have that moisture coming out of, Oklahoma, Kansas, Missouri like the European does. All right, so just something to take note of there. But on the snowfall side of it, much of our snow is in the Central Rockies and in the Sierra Nevada now. But then see how it's adding up in British Columbia, the Cascades and Northern Rockies as we play out there to next Monday. And then if we just keep going, it likes to add up even more. And I just want to make a point that as this system comes out midweek next week, the chances for more snow across the northern tier of the U.S., it does increase. Have no idea where it's going to be just yet, but I think it's going to be cold enough to get some snow into that area. So to compare models, this is the GFS at that time frame as well. Okay, this is what I want to see change. That's your next 7 days, looking at the probability of staying under 1/10 of an inch. And playing it out beyond that, see the erosion of this by day 10? That is the potential increase in flow from the polar jet working its way against the longer standing dry episode we've been in this section of the country. So that's through day 10. If we flip this up to who's on the wetter side of it, this is the location of the wetter conditions. So again, Ohio Valley, we need this moisture in the next 10 days. Northwest is really starting to see an increase there as the flow enters the Northwest first. So that kind of gives us our benchmark ideas on this. We'll look closer at snow when we get into probably late this week into early next week when the patterns actually evolve, that we can make a more confident guess on where that snow is going to be. But one last time, there it is. This is the combination of the polar jet finally getting out there by day 10. Look at that. I love to see this. Subtropical support to the south, deep trough to the north. That's March 1st, 2nd, 3rd. Anything that gets the flow doing this, I like. That's what we need. And that is why the week 2 forecasts continue to increase across the northern tier of the United States with precipitation. I love this morning's GFS ensemble run showing you the week 2 time frame, which is the last 2 days of February and the first 5 days of March. That's really beginning to open up and give us a good look. Okay, I'll do more long range on precip in a second, but I want to come back to the temperature discussion. So you saw this a moment ago, Tuesday's highs. Look at Wednesday's highs. Getting into Thursday, it's just still very mild in the central United States. It presses east. By Friday, getting into Saturday, another cool shot for New England, but very mild here throughout the midsection of the country. That's next Sunday into Monday. So when you ask, why am I concerned about the severe weather threat next week? Remember, this is when this trough comes in. There's a low sitting off the coast. Everything is coming in, and we've just opened this whole sector up to moisture transport and heat. So we're destabilizing the atmosphere because the upper atmosphere is still very cold. The lower atmosphere, it's possible, Omaha north to crack 70 early next week. And I think it's going to even be warmer than this as you go more into the Midwest. Very, very mild conditions. Okay, just to show you, that's day 5 through 10 of the Euro. We looked at the GFS earlier. This is day 10 through 15. So we start to look at all of this and wonder, how long are we going to stay mild? And should we be thinking about an extremely early spring? So let's address that just to kind of complement the forecast we did in the long range yesterday by looking at the main forecast driver right now. So the MJO has collapsed. The polar vortex is on the other side of the planet. And right now it seems as though El Nino-like behavior has taken over. And what I mean by that is, I've shown you this now 5 or 6 times, but let's just look at it again. Every El Nino event that's happened since 1950, if you summarize them and you look at what March could bring, so now we've seen the end of February, we still stay relatively mild throughout much of this half of North America and cooler than average across the south and southwest. Now remember, if you're off by a few degrees in the southwest and south, that's all this goes to. This is a 3-degree Fahrenheit anomaly. You have to remember that this doesn't mean brutally cold. It's just cooler than average. And cooler than average in March in the south is like a difference between being high of 75 and 70, okay? But the idea here is that this sets up the jet to do this. And that's why we see in the historical analogs, wetter in this area, subtropical component coming underneath it, but a little bit drier in through here and drier in the northwest. All right. Is the new European ensemble, matching this? On the temperature side, yes. This is the new March outlook. On the temperature side, again, does not look exactly like the analogs. So this tells me that the longer range model, the ECMWF weeklies as we call it, this extended forecast is showing a very similar El Nino-like March. So on the precipitation side of it, we should expect the same. This is a 30-day anomaly. And about the only difference that I can see is that instead of being drier from Texas up to the Appalachian Mountains here, which is what the historical analogs would suggest, the model says, hey, the flow's too good for that. And you can now see in the newest run that it's backed off on the dry signal in the Northwest and in California with this as well. Meaning that should we get into really good flow this March, we could really, again, punch harder, I guess, against the longer term drought issues. So then the natural question is, well, what about April? So if we look out there into April, this is what April tended to bring in terms of precipitation anomalies. Now, interestingly enough, now remember, this goes a deficit of 3 inches and a positive of 3 inches. What I'm seeing here is that there's a slighter wet bias in California, parts of the Great Basin, Texas, maybe the southeast of the East Coast, a little bit drier in the interior. So could April go over a bit drier and get us prepared to plant a crop in the midsection of the country? Sure, but we got to have the temperatures to support that as well. And it's important to note here that April, when we have fading El Ninos, still tends to kind of split the country with warmer than average conditions north and cooler than average conditions south. But I'm telling you, April is not a month I can ever confidently forecast. And overall, I would say that if you base it on analogs alone, this is a great look. I mean, you're going, wait, cooler? No. Cooler in April down here is not cold. There's not a strong signal with this with like major Arctic blasts if you use El Nino as your guide here. So I think there's going to be a lot of folks that are going to be pushing hard early to go after planting a crop. I want to remind you, though, I'm just thinking about where I live up here in Illinois and the surrounding states. We typically have our last frosts in May, though. Our last frost mid-April. We can get frosts into early May. I just need to throw that out there as a warning. I'll be watching for it, but last frost is usually mid-April, and then after that, we can get into a situation in May that can often deliver some colder air. So just showing you some analog support here as we watch March and April going forward. Let's take you back to South America. This is the tropical system that we mentioned yesterday in the faster video, and it just kind of shows you its current position. A pretty rare event down here. We very rarely have tropical systems in the South Atlantic. I think there's only been 3, maybe in a century. So this is a pretty interesting event down here. But it's not expected to do anything. Impact land, forgive me. So as we play forward in the model run, what happens is this cold front just comes through and destroys it. And there's the front. And so it's already gone by the time we get out here, just a few days from now toward the weekend. Now to the north, we've got pretty good monsoonal flow. And if you just watch this animation, I'm going to play it quickly through the next 10 days. There's a lot of good moisture coming into major growing areas in South America. Watch it again all together. Ready? This is just playing through 10 days. I don't see any significant areas starved of moisture right now in parts of South America. So that means safrinha crop, which is going in, of course. Harvest pace right now on soybeans is probably going to just continue to finish well, and the new moisture for the new crop is looking good. So the issue again becomes in March, do we start to see the dryness in the Amazon bleeding over into the center west region? This is just another update. Okay, we're continuing that narrative, showing the drier potential here, wet in the northeast, wet in Argentina. And remember, since we've been looking at all these analog years, if you put them all together in April, the worry is that we get into this area in through here that has an early slowdown of the monsoon, meaning that we have to be concerned about that center west area not having the right amount of moisture to finish once we get into that critical time period of pollination and then grain fill for the safrinha corn. So I'll leave you there and hope you all have a good rest of your day, and we'll talk again in the morning. Thanks.